If there is one diesel locomotive in American history that is equal parts unsuccessful, controversial, and just simply interesting, it has to be the EMD Branch Line 2. This served as basically a prototype with all different concepts, which would lead to the creation of the GP7 in the 1950s. And because this is such an interesting engine, I think that's the reason why there have been quite a few different plastic models introduced in HO scale over the years. So for this video, I thought it would be interesting to do a detailed comparison review of the three main models of BL2 in HO scale. So first up here, we have the new Bachmann model. It's part of their standard line, DCC equipped. And then next up, we have a first run lifelike Proto 2000. And then last, we have a first run AHM. And to keep all of this fair, as I did with the F unit comparison a while back, I'll be looking at each of these with a detailed checklist, which will score the different details, then features, and then performance of each model before moving on to the total score, as well as the value of the model. And all the scoring will be on a scale of 1 to 5 for each individual subject here. First thing I'd like to look at with each model is the packaging. Now this won't have any effect on the model's rating in the end. I just thought it would be helpful to see how everything looks, the way that it's delivered. So starting with the Bachmann one here, you get a colorful box with a little DCC equipped sticker on there. This is just a generic box that they use for all different models. They just put a different sticker at the end depending on what you're getting. The rest of it, it's going to look the same for pretty much anything, just a list of various features depending on what you're buying. You get a nice big window on the front, so it looks nice. And you can see pretty clearly it's got that plastic clamshell inside that's going to be protective. Very standard. Now, opening it up. Slides on out. There's a little cardboard cover on the bottom there. There, just a little bit of city print, kind of interesting. Makes it look better than just the brown cardboard inside. Get a mail-in thing so that you can get a big catalog. I'm sure everyone orders those. I know it's Sam Strain's absolute favorite thing in the world. Get a nice diagram there showing how everything's built, so you can see right away that it's got a nice kind of full die-cast chassis there. Doesn't go through the full top of the shell, but it at least goes up through the sides there, so should make it nice and heavy. Got your motor with flywheels, 8-wheel drive, very standard mechanism for most Bachmann 4-axle models, and then just some various warranty information and all that. A little bit of other info, so yeah, basic instructions, all nice to have. That's really all you need. And then to open the thing up, it's always a different spot for each of these clamshells. Take that out of the packaging. Little plastic slip there, just to help protect some of the paint. And there's the model. Next up is the Proto 2000 BL2, and of course this is in the brown box since it's a first run model. It's a large, attractive looking box with some nice gold print on it. A big image of the engine, of course. A lot of BL2 printing all around, but then just kind of a plain back because the actual details of the model are found under the front cover, where you get full dimensional diagrams, a description and brief history of the BL2, as well as some other print with the different features that they're wanting to advertise, and 2 windows showing the separated shell and chassis. And of course the separate shell and chassis is something that's pretty unique to the Proto 2000 models because they found back then that this was a very good way to protect all the fragile details on the shell. Open the thing up. Pull that out. You get a big styrofoam shell on there, little warning tag to make sure that you read through some material and figure out exactly the best way to remove this from the box. And then, of course, underneath here you get the manual, which gives you some various details. Open that up. You get an exploded diagram showing the whole inside of it, all the different separate details that are fitted, and then some advice for how to lubricate it and maintain it. Now, of course, I've opened this already, so there's no tape to cut, but normally there would be a couple pieces of tape on most of your Proto 2000s and even Proto 1000s. So let's take the chassis out first. There are these end pieces to hold it in place, keep everything protected, make sure the couplers don't get broken. So you start with your chassis there, and then next up, you got the shell, which you just very gently work out of there. Sometimes it gets a little bit stuck. There's a piece of paper inside that helps it to slide out of there, protects the paint from the styrofoam. And you slip the shell off of there, and there you go. There's your unpackaged Proto 2000 BL2. And then last, but certainly least, is the AHM BL2. And this, of course, is a first run model, so it has a more detailed box than the ones you find on later models, which are just kind of a plain blue and yellow. This one has their 080 printed on the front, as well as a bunch of sort of blueprint stuff. And it says true to blueprint. They don't say which blueprint it's true to, but it is true to a blueprint, that's for sure. And around the sides of the box, it's really mostly just advertising, showing all their different models that you can get, showing some of their accessories, freight cars, layout parts, and other things. Well, actually, I don't see any freight cars on there, but still a bunch of accessories with pricing and all that. You can see just how much things have changed since the early 1960s. This one even still has its original price tag on it, which original retail price was $8.95, but it was on sale for $5.95. Now, removing this from the box, and also you can see that I have taped up this front window here to fix it. It was really torn up. The original foam insert is gone, so I kind of put together a new one just by cutting a couple pieces of foam apart as well as I could. Problem with these old AHM boxes is that the foam had a tendency to disintegrate with age, and I have no doubt that happens to this one. But anyway, when the foam isn't disintegrated, it actually protects the model pretty well. It's a nice soft holding surface, and beyond that, take the model out, and that's really about it. There may have been an instruction sheet in there. In fact, there probably was, but that has since gone missing. But anyway, that shows you what the packaging for all three different models looks like. The only model that requires any assembly, of course, is the Proto 2000 BL2. And that's easy to do. All you need to do is just first pull these end pilot pieces off. Gently slip the shell onto the chassis. Spread the sides a little to get them over those tabs. Gently push it down, slide it into place. There we go. And then you just slide these pilot pieces back on into their holes. And now it is ready to run. Now the first thing I want to look at on each model is the shell quality. So starting off with the Bachmann here, of course it's a plastic shell, so it's not going to score a 5. It would have to be metal to do that. But as far as plastic shells go, this is actually a very high quality piece. As you look around, you'll notice that there's really no seam to be seen anywhere. It's a very well molded piece. If there are any seams, they're very fine and barely noticeable at all. And on top of that, as you look through the different details, they're sharply and cleanly molded, and I really can't find any fault with it at all, so I'll give this a score of 4. Next up is the Proto 2000 BL2, and despite being more than 30 years older than the Bachmann model, this shell has really held up well. As you look around, you can see that the molding is very fine, very clean. All the details are sharp, and there's really hardly any seam around it at all that is noticeable. Really, the only ones I could pick out were just where the back is kind of joined to the sides here. You can sort of see that when the light is at certain angles, but beyond that, this is truly a very clean shell, so I'm going to give it a score of 4. And now for the AHM BL2. I thought this shell was going to be a bit worse since it's so old and it was a cheap model, but honestly the quality of it isn't too bad. I mean, you can see that there are a couple visible seams, but they're not really big like I've seen on some other cheap shells. They're just present. And beyond that, the molding is actually pretty clean. The details are straight, fairly sharp on it, so for its era, it's not a badly made shell at all. I'll give it a score of 3. And now next I want to look at the overall accuracy of these models. And the Bachmann one here has an excellent shell that really captures the look and dimensions of the BL2 very closely. Fuel tank, trucks, paint, everything else, it's all very accurate. And depending on the railroad, they'll either put the radiator on top or they won't, so this is correct here. The only thing I can fault on the accuracy is the pilots. They only have a single shell that they use for all the different models, but depending on the railroad, you could have a different pilot on here. So since they didn't go all the way into doing prototype-specific pilots, I can only give the accuracy on this one a 4 instead of a 5. And now the Proto 2000 model for overall accuracy matches the BL2 very well. Has an accurately molded shell with good dimensions all around. Fuel tank, trucks, paint all match the appearance of the prototypes very well. But again, this is just a single generic shell instead of having prototype-specific details. So even though it is a very accurate one overall, it's still only going to get a 4. And now the AHM model. Well, it looks like a BL2. It's not the worst I've ever seen, so I'll give it a 2. And now getting into the more individual details, we'll start with the handrails. BL2 only has front and rear handrails, so looking at these, you can see on the Bachmann model that they are very straight, very finely molded. They are plastic, but that just makes them flexible, and they spring right back to shape, so good quality material there. And you can even see in the chain that it is very finely molded with a nice see-through effect. So since I really can't find any issue at all with these, I will give that a 5. And now for the Proto 2000 model. Again, these are plastic handrails like the Bachmann one. They have some flexibility to them and they're nice and straight. For something from the 1980s, they don't look too bad, but I've also seen cleaner railings from that time. There is a slight see-through effect to the chain, but some of those holes are also a bit filled with plastic. And you can see that pretty much all around the edges there is flash and other roughness that detracts from their appearance and just really feels really rough on there. So I'll give these a 3, since they do at least look decent. And now the AHM railings. They're very thick and very toy-like in appearance. They do at least capture the shape properly and they're installed straight, but since they really don't look that good, I think the best I can give them is a 2. And now next up, we'll look at the grab irons. Now on the Bachmann model here, this might just be the most disappointing detail of all. You get 6 wire grab irons around the cab, 2 on top, 4 on the sides. There aren't any in front, aside from one that is molded onto the top there. And around the back, even though they look all right, all of the grab irons are molded onto the shell. Now this is not a cheap model, and this is the year 2026, not 1986. So for something like this, I would definitely expect to have all those grab irons be pre-installed separate parts at the factory. So it's kind of disappointing to see on here. At least you can add 4 to the front, and at least the ones around the cab look decent. So I'll still give this a 3 since they don't look bad, but it could have been much better. And now for the Proto 2000, this is actually a 1980s model when most others had either molded on grab irons or dimples for drilling out to install your own. And they went the extra mile to install separate grab irons at every point possible. Now, of course, these are all plastic parts, so they're a little thicker than wire's going to be. They're a bit fragile. And not all of the moldings are completely clean, but they still do an excellent job with them. So even though they're not perfect, since they did add so much to this, I'll give this one a rating of 4. And now the AHM model, aside from these really thick ones that are molded onto the side of cab, it has nothing. Not even drill points or anything for installing your own. But even so, this is better than having really thick and terrible looking molded grab irons all around, so I'll at least give it a 2. And now for the roof ventilation on the Bachmann model, you can see that the vents are finely molded, but they're not see-through. They don't have any attempt at detail below the top grill work, so they look fine, but I can only give them a 3. And now the Proto 2000 model, the roof ventilation is fully see-through, very finely molded, and has the fans installed inside and painted so that you can see them. So this one gets an easy 5 in this area. And the AHM model's roof ventilation is bad, really bad. It gets a 1. Looking at the ventilation on the sides, you have the louvered vents here. Those all look very nice. Then around here, you actually have about 2 layers of molding there, with the surface being kind of your chicken wire grill, while you have the vertical grill inside of there. That's all extremely finely molded, and if you can really get up close there, which I would have to change the view of the camera here to really look at it, it is really about as finely molded as plastic can be in this area. The only way you could make this better would be to have 2 layers of etched metal in there. So I'll give this one a 4. And for the Pro 2000 model, again, the ventilation all looks really good on the sides. It's cleanly molded. For the larger grills here, you can see kind of that chicken wire mesh that's molded into there. But at the same time, it's a little flat beyond that. So even though it does look pretty good overall, it's not as good as Bachmann's. So I'll give it a score of 3. And for the AHM model, the molding is honestly pretty good around the ventilation, especially for something from the early 60s. Probably the worst part of it would be the large grills here, which you can see have a pretty flat mesh molded into them. But even so, the grills could definitely have been worse than this. They look okay. I'll give it a 2. For the Bachmann model, for the walkways on the front and back, it's just a simple, smooth surface. They didn't put any detail into it. They didn't mold in any walkway tread or anything like that. So since all it is a smooth surface, and I mean, at least it looks pretty clean overall, but I can only give it a 2. For the Proto 2000 model, again, it's just a smooth walkway, no detail molded into that, no tread or anything. It also has kind of this odd obstruction in the middle that doesn't appear on any other models. But then, on the other hand, it does have this flip-down step, which is kind of a cool feature, so I think that at least saves it from having a 1, so I can still give it a 2. And here's the AHM model, and oddly enough, the oldest and cheapest one is the only one that made an attempt to have any sort of walkway tread detail molded into it, so I don't know how realistic that tread is. It's probably not very realistic at all, but at the same time, they did try, so I'll give it a 3. Next, for the pilot details, the Bachmann model has a separate lift bar made of wire, moves up and down. It's very nice. It also has a separate cut lever there, so that all looks good. You only get separate details down there, but then, on the other hand, as I said earlier, they don't do prototype-specific detailing here. You only get 1 pilot, so this one gets a score of 3. Proto 2000 model, like the Bachmann model, has separately applied details all around, no molded in parts, but also only a single pilot for all different models, no prototype specific details, so it gets a 3. And it's now the AHM model, 1. Now for the cab details on the Bachmann model, you get separately applied sunshades, windshield wipers, and you also get these winch deflectors here, so good amount of separately applied detail. Everything else is molded very finely, but it is missing anything in the cab. It's completely empty space, no interior, no crew or anything else. So I'll give the cab details a score of 3. For the Proto 2000 cab details, you also get separately applied sunshades as well as very finely scaled windshield wipers there. And one neat detail about these sunshades, even though they're not any chunkier than the Bachmann ones, you can slide them forward and back, just like on the real BL2, so you can change the position there however you want. So that's a really cool feature. And on top of that, even though you don't get an interior, you do get a crew. They're unpainted, but you do at least get a crew there. So I think the only thing that could have made this better is if it had a full painted interior, so I'll give this one a score of 4. And the AHM model seems to have the incorrect number of windows. No separately applied details, no interior or anything else. I wouldn't expect that from a model of this area anyway. But then also, I don't know if this is supposed to be like some kind of a walkway tread or what, but it's just weird. So I think I can only give this cab a score of 1. And now for the windows and the window glass. The shape of the windows matches the prototype photos very well. It's all finely scaled, as I've said before, so can't find any problems there. And as for the windows themselves, they have a nice flush fit, very clear. They look really good all around. I can't find any fault with that, so both get a rating of 5. For the Proto 2000 model, the windows are still very well shaped, but they are slightly shrunken compared to the Bachmann one with slightly thicker frames to them, so that gets a 4. And the window glass, very good quality, nice and clear. It's a mostly flush fit, but not quite perfect, so I'll also give that a rating of 4. And for the AHM model, the windshield is correctly shaped, so that looks all right. The windows on the sides, though, they are missing their framing entirely, so they look pretty bad compared to the other models. So the window shape gets a 2. And as for the glass, it's clear. Not the best quality molding, but it's clear at least. It's not flush fitting, and it's completely open in the back there, which is odd, so I'll also give the glass a 2. And now for the rest of the details around the model, like the horns, and then just other molded details, little lift rings on there. The lift rings are molded in place, so they're not actual rings, so when you look up close, they're not really that great, but from a distance, you barely notice it because they're so small. The horns, they're finely molded. They look good. They have an open bell there, which is nice, not just a flat front. And if this was one of the ones that had the sort of radiator piece on top there, I'm sure that would look very good too. The pictures I've seen, that looks like a finely molded part, so I can't really find much fault with this, so I think I can give it a rating of 4. For the Proto 2000, it comes with more separate details than the Bachmann. You get 2 different sizes of horns here, which is interesting. I'd have to look at photos maybe, see if that's correct or not, but those are also pretty fine parts, open bells on them. There are no lift rings at all on this one, and these exhaust stacks here, those aren't open at all. They are on the Bachmann one. As for the rest of the details, that's a nicely molded part there. The other parts as you go around, they look good. It's got that little outlet box there, as well as on the back. So even though the quality of the parts is just a little bit below Bachmann's, since there is more of it, they went to that extra effort, I can still give this one a 4. And for the AHM model, the only additional details you get are those horns there, which aren't really very well done. In fact, they're actually open bells at both ends, so it's kind of these weird bi-directional parts. It does have some of the molded on details in other areas though, like the marker lights back and on the front there. But then some things that are very obvious are missing, like the ladders here. You don't get that at all. And of course there's no option to get that radiator piece in back. At least these exhaust stacks here are open, so that's good. But yeah, the extras on this one, since they do at least have the horns, but it's not really done that well, I'll give it a rating of 2. For the fuel tank on the Bachmann model and the rest of the chassis, there really isn't much detail underneath there. Most of it's just going to be around here. So you got your details molded into the skirts around each side. And those are painted too. They look good. Everything is finely molded. Fuel tank itself is just a single piece, no additional parts there. It's very simple, but it captures the shape very well. It looks good, and you're really not going to notice a lack of detail for the chassis at most angles, so I'll at least give that one a rating of 4. To get a rating of 5, it would have to have all those extra details like you might see on some of the really high-end models, but this is still good. For the Proto 2000 chassis fuel tank area, you can see that like the Bachmann one, there's finely molded detail around the skirts there, as well as the little painted gauges and other parts. That all looks good. There's a little more detail to the underframe itself, which you can see over the trucks there, so that's nice to have. The fuel tank itself isn't really the best looking part though. It's not painted, it's just blackened, and the shape of it is kind of rounded where it shouldn't be. There are a couple molding seams, filing marks maybe, so yeah, not quite the best part there, but it's still at least decent in the underframe area, so I can give this one a score of 3. And now for the AHM model, I mean, there is detail molded into the skirts there like on the other ones, but it's kind of oddly done. These 3 bars here, those are supposed to be like slots, but they made them like something that's standing out there. No extra painting on the gauges or anything, and they added these tabs for holding the shell onto the chassis, which shouldn't be visible, but they made them visible. The actual fuel tank detail, it's just kind of part of the shell. And then the fuel tank underneath, I don't even know what they were doing here. This looks like, I don't know, it's just kind of weird. Like, it has detail to it, but at the same time, I don't know where they really got this from for the shape of the fuel tank, because the other ones that are more realistic certainly don't look like this. So I think I'm going to have to give this one a score of 1. Now for the truck details. On the Bachmann model, these are basically the same parts they've been using since the 1980s. They're well scaled, have good depth, sharpness of detail and everything. And I looked at these parts before on the Plus F7 review about a year ago, and I gave them a 3 because of a bad coating of paint on that one, but it otherwise would have been a 4. On this one though, they've actually moved backwards in the detail quality, in making it so that the separate air brake cylinders are now molded on parts, and they are underscaled as far as I can find. So since they, for some reason, moved backwards on the quality of these, I'm going to give them a 3. For the Proto 2000 side frames, these are excellently made parts, really sharp moldings all around, separate parts everywhere, so everything just looks really great on them, nice depth of detail and everything. And I think I would have given these a rating of 5, but one issue I found is that on all the photos of the BL2 I can find, from any railroad, none of them have this strut as far as I can see. They instead have 2 of these air brake cylinders on them, more like the F units of the time. So since these would normally be a rating of 5 just for their detail and quality, because they seem to be incorrect somewhat for the BL2, I'll take that down to a 4. And now for the AHM model, well, these would get a rating of 1 on a C-liner or other FM unit, but since this is an EMD unit and these are the wrong trucks altogether, I think I'm actually going to have to give it a 0, even though this is a 1 to 5 scale. Literally, the only thing that is right on here is the number of wheels, and even these wheels are oversized for the BL2, I think. So, yeah, that's a 0. For the paint quality on the Bachmann model, It is fantastic all around. The coating is perfectly smooth everywhere you look, not a single fault to it, not a nick or anything else anywhere. The separation between colors is perfectly straight and sharp. The lettering is nice, clear, and bold, smooth. There's not a single thing that can be faulted about the paint on these, so I'm giving that one a 5. Now for the Proto 2000 model, the paint quality is very good. Coloring all looks excellent. There's smooth and clear separation between the colors with the line work and everything. It's all nice and straight. The printing is nice and clear, good and bold. The only issue with printing at all is that it's a little shinier than the paint. Now, one issue with this model is that the paint seems to be pretty susceptible to buffing just through handling. You can see where it's gotten shinier in certain areas just from picking it up and putting it down a few times. And there are also signs of dust underneath the paint in a few areas, so it seems like they didn't quite get the shell clean enough before painting some of these. So I'm going to have to give the paint quality, I think, a 3 overall on this, just because of some of the minor issues, but it is still a very good paint job on these models. Now for the AHM BL2, the quality of the paint coating for the main color is good. Of course, easy to get a good coating of black on there, but it's nice and thin. It doesn't obscure the details. The lines on the sides are a bit fuzzy though, not perfectly straight, and also it's not really supposed to go over the walkway there from what I can find of photos of the real ones. The lettering is decent. It's clear and bold. On the front though, you can see that it's not exactly opaque around there. It's maybe a little bit of pooling in certain areas. So, also you can see some signs of dust particles underneath the paint. So again, they didn't get it perfectly clean. So I'll give the quality of paint on this one a 2. For the paint accuracy of the Bachmann models, looking through photos and comparing this, I can't find a single thing that's out of place or out of line in any way, so I'm going to have to give this a 5. For the Proto 2000 BL2, I tried to find any photos I could of the real Missouri Pacific units. There was really only one clear photo that I could come across, at least in my searching. Maybe there are more. But from what I can see, the lettering, striping, everything else is all very accurate. Everything's right where it should be. The coloring is all good. Maybe that F is a little oversized, and that right there, that's finely printed. But yeah, since it's very close but not quite perfect, I'll give it a 4. It doesn't quite get a 5, but still gets a 4. For the AHM BL2, the stripe on the side matches the appearance of unit number 82 as it appeared in 1961. However, the rest of the model, the lettering along the sides is too large, especially the F and DF15 there. That's practically O scale. The stripe should come all the way around to the front of the nose. It doesn't, and the number and logo there are a scale foot too low. It's also missing the lightning bolt and radio symbol that should be on the side there. So, and also this should be black on here. The stripe should end here and then continue on that side. So it's definitely not an accurate unit. It at least has the right appearance, so I'll give it a 2. But yeah, definitely not up there on accuracy. Now the last thing is the ability to customize the models to better match certain prototypes. Bachmann doesn't offer an undecorated version of the BL2. You can only get painted units. You can add grab irons to the front at least if you do some careful drilling and work around there, so that's at least good. You can maybe add some other details in certain places. But those grab irons, those would have to be carved and sanded if you strip the paint off. And the pilots, of course, you only get one option there. They're molded in place, so that would also be really difficult. So since you can at least add some grab irons, maybe a couple other parts, I'll give this a 2, but you're really limited on your options with this if you want to do any customization. For the Proto 2000, customization on it is definitely better than the Bachmann one. They offered an undecorated version, so you can do your own painting and lettering. although the grab irons are still pre-installed, so that could complicate masking, but you still have the ability to paint it however you want. And of course, since these trucks are clones of Atherns, you could change out the side frames for different ones that are maybe a better match to the unit that you're modeling. Really, the only downside at all is that the Pilot only has a single option, so that complicates doing detail modifications there. But since it does have a lot more options and flexibility as far as customization, I can still give this one a 4, I think. And the AHM BL2 used to be a pretty popular model for customization just because it was the only plastic model on the market for BL2. But any customization work to actually make it look realistic is extremely involved. You have to throw out the chassis entirely and install a new one in there to get the correct trucks, which a lot of people do anyway, just to make these into good runners. All the molded details on here, like the Pilot ones, those handrails on the sides, you have to real carefully carve those out, sand them, do all sorts of other work. The vents there, I mean, you would want to change those out for some fine scale ones, do all sorts of work here and all sorts of other places. And then even after that, you still have a body shell that is out of scale in many different areas, such as the width and the size of the cab and quite a few other things. So since you have to throw out basically everything except just pretty much the base shell, which still needs a ton of work to look realistic, I'm going to rate this one a 1 for customizability. So looking at the total scores for all the different models, personally I prefer the Proto 2000 just because of all the extra details, but the Bachmann slightly edges it out with 64 points. Proto 2000 got 62 points, and AHM fell way behind with 29 points. And now we'll move on to the features section of each model, starting with the disassembly and maintenance. So I've got the Bachmann one here, of course. And for basic maintenance, since this does use the same truck side frame assembly that they've had since the 1980s, it's pretty easy to get inside of these. All you need to do is find the where it's clipped onto there. Just have to find a place to kind of maneuver around into there. Find a way to get under there. Pry that tab up. And there you go. So there it is right there. You can oil the axles from here, add some fresh grease to the gears if needed. They're nylon, so they do pretty well with minimal lubrication. Okay, it looks like it goes better if you go this tab first and then snap this way. Now this is essentially the same truck design, but it seems like it's actually a little harder to get this latched than it used to be. Must be new moldings. Well, anyway, there's that. And now to actually get inside of the model. First thing to do, actually, yeah, looks like I do need to take the couplers off. So a screw and a cover for each one. It pulls back like that, so then the coupler can come out the front. Actually, it looks like that won't be necessary, because this is part of the body shell. That is good to know. Body looks like it's held on by 4 screws, one in each corner, just behind the pilots. Now, let's see if this just lifts off. Yes, it does. Okay, so that body shell comes off very easily. And there's all your electronics in there. You've got the dual mode DCC board here connected to the LED lighting. Then your motor with dual flywheels down here. This is their lower speed gray motor, I see. So that should also make this one a very efficient runner. Then your standard universals going from just those slotted cups from the motor to the trucks. And you can see that they've also done some factory balancing work in here by drilling small holes in the flywheels where necessary. Now, as for going further in for maintenance, you can see pretty clearly here, all of the wiring is soldered in place, and they've even put some like RTV silicone type of, or hot glue over some of the wiring from the look of it. Looks like that's the wiring to the LEDs. So that means that you can't actually disconnect anything in here, which is not good for maintenance, of course. So you've got a screw holding each of these LED assemblies. It's interesting, instead of just running, I mean, it's only one LED at each end, or no, actually, okay, it's a front LED, and then you have little side LEDs for the number boards, so that's why they did a whole PC board there. Now the wiring is tucked underneath this clip. Let's see here. 2 more screws for the decoder board. That lifts up with the truck wires soldered to it, of course. More wires clipped into the motor retainer here from the look of it. That sort of comes up, but of course there are the wires from the motor holding that clip down, so this is not a very maintenance-friendly engine so far. I mean, at least you can get in to oil the motor bearings, but if you have to do further work beyond that, it could spell trouble. Especially if you want to do something like change to a different decoder, you're going to have to rewire everything. There's no quick plug-and-play here. Well, all right. What else have we got? 1 screw holding each of the trucks in place. But again, things are soldered together. Of course, this is the same sort of assembly system that they've been using for their trucks for decades now, so nothing unusual there. The trucks themselves, as long as you can get them out of the model, they're easy to disassemble. All you do is take off the side frame assembly, that top cap there, and from that point on, the worm is just snapped in with its bearings, and you can push those pins out with a screwdriver to remove any gears for cleaning. But what about the motor, though? I do see a speaker grill down here. They do offer a sound version of the model. Minor correction about the Bachmann model, they are not offering sound at this point. They are only offering it sound ready and DCC installed. Okay, fuel tank. No screw for the motor though. 2 little wires for your, or little hole for your 2 speaker wires to come through. So I guess, oh yeah, the motor just pulls up. So there you go. And that is basically the full disassembly and maintenance of this, model for doing maintenance. So, as for ratings on all that, for your basic maintenance, I'm definitely giving this one a 5 just because it's easy to pop those side frames off of there, unclip those, and take the body off to get a little extra oiling in. There's pretty much no trouble in that area. Now, as for the full disassembly for deep down maintenance and other work, I think I'm going to have to bring this down to a 2, even though it's pretty easy to get to the parts. You've got a mess of wiring to deal with. If you want to do anything, it's going to require soldering, unsoldering, resoldering, and other work like that. They're not using any sorts of caps or anything else on the board to make it easy to disconnect wires. So yeah, this is getting a 2. And for the ease of disassembly on the Bachmann model, I decided to change that from a 2 to a 3, since honestly it is pretty easy to actually get to the parts. The only issue is that you're having to deal with those wires. And now checking out the maintenance and disassembly of the Proto 2000 model, And of course, it already comes partially disassembled in the box with the shell separated from the chassis. But if you have to get back into it, of course, that changes things a little bit. Even so, it's pretty easy to get where you need to go. Bearings can be oiled without even taking the gear cover off of there. All you need is just a little dropper to put a little bit in each of those, and that takes care of that. If you do need to get into the gears, though, it's an Athearn style cover there, so all you have to do is kind of get a screwdriver up in that edge there, as I showed just a moment ago. Then another one there. Off comes that cover. And then you can add your grease to the gears. So that is extremely easy to do. And now for the disassembly of the model. And of course, as you saw before, the shell is just snapped on. You have to get these two, pull off these two pilot pieces. Never glue these. Otherwise, that'll give you complications that you don't want. So that's off of there. And then just grab the fuel tank from each side, about like, kind of like that. Spread that out. Might have to kind of go into the center a little bit. Pop off that tab. There we go. Yeah, spread out the fuel tank and pull the shell off. It's about as easy as can be right there. Now, for the rest of the model, of course, this is an Athearn clone chassis that Lifelike used on their early Proto 2000s, so most maintenance is going to be pretty easy. Really about the only issue you're going to have is the fact that the wiring and these interesting, instead of using the sort of spring clip things that Athearn did, or the spring plates, they use these sort of metal braids in here that are soldered in place. So that's going to be really good electrical pickup from them, of course, but it's and so they've got some flexibility, which is good too, but that's going to cause complications for getting the model apart if you need to do that. Now, for actually getting a truck off, so long as you unsolder that braid there, all you have to do is pop that cover off, take out the worm, and the truck drops down below. I'm not going to take it off all the way though, because that would require unsoldering, and I don't want to go that far for this video. And also you can see that I've already added fresh grease to this one to replace what was in there, which was about at least 30 years old, maybe even 35 years old, so I didn't want to use that. And then for the rest of the model, so you have this lighting piece here, or this plastic piece here that holds the crew, which are just molded in color, as well as the two lights. And this should just be popped on. Yeah, so that pops off like an Athearn piece and gives you immediate access to the motor. The motor has one wire that's soldered up into here and then comes back down to the chassis here, which is kind of interesting. And then the wire is held into the chassis using this plastic pin here. So if I were to pull that pin out or push it out, which I might be able to do here, give that a try. Yep, there it goes. There we go. Push that out, and the wire comes free, and that allows that to come a little more free. But then you still have to unsolder the trucks. But once you've done that, the rest of it can come up. And since this has the Athearn style soft pads, you can push them up from below, but I found that you can just give the motor a good yank like this, pry it up a bit. Well, actually, I think I can just do this. Yeah, pry up one side, and you can get the motor out of there for any sort of maintenance you might need to do. There shouldn't be much, though, aside from just a little oiling, so most of the time it won't be necessary to pull the motor out. Universals, again, Athearn style parts. So if you need to disconnect them, all you do is give it a pull. And again, like that. And you've got your telescoping universals there. So that's all for the chassis disassembly or model disassembly for maintenance here. So for the ease of maintenance, it's about as easy as you can get, so I'll give that a 5. And for the ease of disassembly, because a little bit of desoldering is required there, but I mean, that takes a point off, but otherwise, everything else is really easy to get to. So I'll give it a 4. Now for maintenance and disassembly on the AHM BL2. So starting just with some of the basic maintenance here. Of course, the entire drive line is inside of the rear truck, and then you have nothing but a simple electrical pickup system in the front, so there's not much that you have to deal with here. Now, as for disassembly to get to it, it's mostly easy. There's just one small complication that you have to remember. So first, that screw comes out on the power truck. Then this screw here actually goes into a small nut. Just came out there. Oops, everything dropped out there. But yeah, anyway, there's a small nut that fits underneath there, which kind of complicates getting that screw back in place. But you can see here that once that plate is off, everything is completely accessible, all the gears, wheels, everything else. So that's easy access to get into there. It also gives you access to the coupler right here. Now the coupler has a Rivarossi style spring on it, so you do want to be careful not to lose that, or this little cap that helps to retain everything. For the front truck, it's the same story of one screw just going into the plastic and one screw going into a nut, and that's going to be the one with the front coupler there. So about all you'll ever want to take that off for is maybe to clean off the electrical contacts inside, so there isn't really much reason to take the front truck apart. You can see the electrical wipers in there that contact the axles. Other than that, you can just do your bit of oiling on the axle itself right there, and that'll be enough. You don't need to take the truck apart completely. Now, as for how to get inside the model, spread the body, and off it goes. And then that gives you full access to the motor, the light, and all the wiring inside of it. And on this first run unit, there's also this screw here, and this is for making adjustments to the worm in case you need to do any tuning with the gearing to make it run just right. So like if the worm was too loose, then you press it on, then it's too tight, then you put the screw in and just real gradually turn that until everything is working exactly the way that it needs to. And that does have to be very precisely adjusted because there is a whole ball bearing system between the worm and the top of the truck there and the motor, or between the worm and the motor, so that can be a little complicated to adjust. And as for the rest of the disassembly here, so you can see that there's a wire soldered here to this pin on the truck, comes up around to the motor here, and then the motor is connected to the front truck and light with these clips here, which it's possible to slip them out from the brushes there, just like that. The only complication comes from this wire here. If you need to drop the whole motor and truck out of there for really in-depth maintenance, then you have to unsolder that wire. But since everything is very open, it's very easy to access whatever you need to around here for oiling and anything else. And also, when the body is off like that, it's really easy to put the nut back in place there. Now, also on these first generation units, unlike the ones that came along later, if you do want to get the motor out, first you have to take out these 4 screws that hold the base plate to the plastic base. Okay, that is now released. Then pull that around, slide it forward a little, and then to take the motor off from the plate here, after you have used this screw to completely pull the worm off, as well and take out the ball bearings inside of here, Then you can slip this pin out to release the motor from the plate, and that allows you to do whatever cleaning and in-depth maintenance you want on there. But I do not want to pull this apart any further because that means readjusting the bearings, and I already have this perfectly set and don't want to do that again because that can take a while. Let's just take that cover back off there. You can see how this truck is constructed too. So the idler gears are all plastic. And this is based on the original Rivarossi Sea-Liner truck system from the 1950s. So it has these helical gears here that mesh with the worm, and then the finer tooth straight gears that mesh with the axles, which have brass gears. And then the wheels themselves sit in this steel plate that has been formed to shape and acts as bearings, as well as a system for electrical pickup. So it's going to be more durable than the ones that came along later, which have a fully plastic truck, plastic gears, plastic bearings all around. So there's your full disassembly of the AHM BL2 chassis, first generation. For the ease of maintenance, I'll give it a rating of 4, since it is easy to access everything around here, everything that you need for the bottom, as well as to get inside to oil the motor bearing. The only slight complication is the nut that fits onto each of these trucks. As long as you can make sure to watch that, there's not really going to be a problem, so I'll give it a rating of 4. And as for the overall ease of disassembly, it's an honestly simple design, but because there are complications along the way, such as having to unsolder one of these wires in order to remove the truck, as well as the fact that you have to deal with a very finely tuned ball bearing system in here, I'm only going to give it a rating of 2. I also want to give some quick ratings just for the second generation AHM BL2, since those are probably easier to find than the first generation. And those use the same overall chassis design as the Sea-Liner one that I have here. So for the ease of maintenance on these, you do still have to deal with the nut, so that gets the same rating of 4. And as for the ease of overall disassembly, since this one removes the complication of having the ball bearings in there, you do still have to pull the worm if you want to get the motor completely off, but it's not as hard since that's a plastic worm that's on there now, so you really just have to get a screwdriver in there, pry the truck off of there, and then that's it. You also don't have to deal with unsoldering any wires. All you have is the clips here, so that also makes it easier. And no screws to undo here, you just push out this rod and out comes the motor. So for the second generation ones, the ease of disassembly gets a rating of 4. And now looking at the motor quality for the Bachmann BL2, of course, like I mentioned before, this has their standard motor. It's a 5-pole with the skewed armature, and the gray capped one, I've always known it to be a very efficient motor. It's not the highest in torque, but it makes up for that just by using very little power. Now the bearings in these Bachmann motors are pretty cheap. They can get a little noisy after a while and require more frequent oiling. But the motors themselves, I've known them to be reliable. And yeah, it's got enough torque to move the model, so the quality of this motor, I think I can give it a 4. As for the flywheels, they have been perfectly balanced. Good quality parts here. Absolutely no problems at all from them. So I'll give them a 5. And now for the Proto 2000 motor quality. This is a clone of the Athearn Gold motor, but I think these were actually made better than Athearn's motors at the time. So just starting that up. You can see it takes off nice and smooth. It's quiet. It does make some noise. It's not perfectly quiet. But overall, not bad. It's also efficient, drawing less than 0.1 amps, running free like that. And these also have some really good torque to them too. They're strong enough to drive some of their biggest diesels. And I've never really known these motors to fail either. They're well made, high quality. About all they need is a little oil now and then, but even then their bearings are high quality too, so even then they almost never need that. Also, slowing it down there, you can see that they maintain their low speed very well. So any issues that this model might have with low speed control once I get to that testing would likely be from the chassis itself rather than the motor. So even though this isn't the quietest motor around, it's still about as good as a motor can get, so I'm going to give that a 5. As for the flywheels, these are also really high quality. I feel only the tiniest bit of vibration. So they're not 100% perfect, but still excellent. So I'll give them a 4. Now for this first generation AHM BL2 motor, I mean, they honestly made a pretty solid effort with these. It has a 5-pole armature. It's built really heavy, strong magnet in there, really big one that fills up that whole practically third of the motor. So it's got a lot of torque to it. It's a smooth runner. Not even too noisy for its day. And low speed control, it's not going to be the best. Stops pretty quickly there. It also has self-centering bearings as well as an oil pad. So yeah, these are heavy built motors. Even has a metal bottom plate there. The issue though, or multiple issues with these motors, is that they have excessively high current draw. When I had it going free there just a moment ago, it was using almost half an amp, no load or anything. Also, the brush design, it's very easy for these to become just the tiniest bit misaligned as wires pull around here when the truck is moving around, when it's doing this motion. That can cause inconsistency with the speed while it's running. I've also seen inconsistencies with the quality of the commutators in these, where some of them, like this one, are nice and smooth, but then others, they have this kind of motion to them and will grind the brushes down in a very short amount of time. So I can only give this motor a rating of 2, even though it is a smooth runner. They have problems with quality control and other design issues. Now for the second generation AHM motor, it's a very similar design to the first generation, but they cheapened it a lot. They took the poles down from 5 to 3, so there's way more cogging in there. These really can't run well at low speed at all. And the bearing quality was reduced. The metal plate was replaced with a plastic one. And the brushes weren't changed at all. Same design there. And you can hear that these are very loud motors. I have tuned this one as well as possible. So this is about as good as they get, I'd say. But yeah, no low speed control there. And they have the same high current draw as the 5-pole motors while having less torque. So this is one of those rare times when I will give a motor a rating of 1. Also, no flywheels or any way to install a flywheel, so I'll just have to mark a 0 on that part of the sheet. I almost forgot to mention these 3-pole second generation motors also tend to wear out their brushes really quickly, even when they're made perfectly. I don't know why that is, but they just seem to wear out fast. Now I want to take a look at the lighting on the Bachmann BL2. So as I showed before, it has lights at both ends, LEDs for the headlight, reverse light, as well as small LEDs for the number boards. So switching over to the dark scene now and powering that up, you can see that the headlight, reverse light, they have bluish white LEDs, which I thought Bachmann had switched away from using about 10 or 15 years ago, but it seems like they have gone back to it, which is definitely a step backwards for them. The number boards have the correct color, as you can see, so I don't know why they didn't just use those all around. It would have made more sense. So yeah, the color of the LEDs there knocks off a point. Also, the lighting is not directional, no matter which way it's going. It's either on or off. I also tested that under DCC, and it's the same thing. Lights are on or off, no directional control, so that also takes a point off. As for the rest of it, I mean, the lighting it looks really good. There's no bleed in there. It's nice and clear, lights up bright. So this could have been much better with directional lighting and correctly colored LEDs, but since they didn't exactly put in the best effort there, I'll give this one a score of 3. Now for the lighting system in the Proto 2000 BL2, these first generation models, it just has a simple constant lighting circuit, which is half a dozen diodes soldered together in series with the motor. They're under this plastic cap here. Headlights, the bulbs are soldered directly to them through the wires, and that makes it so that the motor has to get up to a couple volts to draw some current, and then the lights come on to full brightness before the motor starts to run. So that's how that circuit works. Now taking this over to the layout, switching to the dark scene. So going forward, well, you can kind of see a problem here. That headlight bulb is too far backwards. It should have been positioned further into the nose to light up the headlight better, but instead most of the light is going into the cab. The reverse light is perfectly fine. There's really no bleed at all from that. It shines brightly through its lenses. But since that front light looks pretty bad, it's poorly positioned there with all that bleed and everything, not lighting up the lenses properly, I'll have to give this system a rating of 3. Now for the lighting system on the AHM BL2, it is the simplest thing that you can possibly imagine. One bulb in the front, no diode or anything else, no bulb in the back. So now taking this to the layout, switching to the dark scene. So you can see that it shines just fine through the headlight lens. No trouble there, really. It's not the brightest, not the dimmest either. Also shines into the cab, though, so you're going to see light wherever there's clear plastic, so I can give it a rating of 2. Now for the wheel and gear quality of the Bachmann BL2, of course, these are the same wheels and gears they've been using since the late 1980s. Just kind of refined a little bit here and there, so they're cheaply made, not exactly the best quality parts, but they are still very good, especially for lower cost models. Just powering that up there. They work quietly. You can see that they rotate pretty smoothly. There's very little wobble or inconsistency with the gears that's noticeable. And in the past 20 years or so, I'd say since the early 2000s, they've basically eliminated the splitting problems that some of the gears used to have. So yeah, these are going to be very reliable. Since they're not perfectly made though, I'll give them a 4. As for the wheels, most of them are excellent quality, perfectly rounded and everything. I just noticed maybe one wheel on the rear truck. You can see there it is out of round, so that's going to cause a bit of wobble as the model runs around. It won't be perfectly smooth. So because of that bit of inconsistency in the manufacture of the wheels, I'll have to take it down to a 4. And now looking at the wheel and gear quality of the Proto 2000 BL2, start that up there. So for the idler gears, these are decent parts. They're not quite perfectly made, but they run smooth enough. Just the slightest bit of out-of-round wobble to them, which you can kind of see there in the middle. The problem, though, comes with the original axle gears, which are pretty much guaranteed to split on these, and you're going to have to replace them. I had to replace all 4 of the gears on this model with new ones. I used Athearn parts, which are drop-in fit and easy to find. And now it works real smoothly again. There's a little bit of gear noise, but not too much. So they weren't really super well refined yet at this point. And because the original gears have that tendency to split, I'm going to have to give it a gear quality rating of 2. I'm not rating the Athearn gears, I'm rating the original Proto 2000 gears, and they get a 2. As for the wheels, though, these are nearly perfectly made parts. There's not one wheel I can find on here that is out of round in any way. There's just the tiniest bit of maybe wobble to this one here, but nothing's going to cause the model to wobble while it's running around the track. So the wheels, they get a 5. And now looking at the wheel and gear quality in the AHM first generation BL2. So as I showed before, it has helically matched gears to the brass worm there, brass axle gears. The rest of these are fine-toothed. They're all on metal bearings. So that's actually all pretty nice quality there. And actually getting that running, just have to hold that gear down. There's very little noise from the gears at all. Almost no noise, really. They turn very smoothly. They're quiet. I've only seen one case of the gears in any of these units failing before, so it seems like failures are pretty uncommon. So the overall gear quality, I think I'm actually going to have to give it a 4 for this one. They're really nicely made. As for the wheels, they're dependent on tires for traction. That's going to cause some wobble because of tires, as they often do. And the wheels themselves, they're not all made to the highest quality standard either, so there's definitely a high potential for wobble from these models. So for the overall wheel quality, since they do rely on tires, and I've found that they're not really consistency with being perfectly rounded and all that, and also, even though they are nickel plated, which is nice, they'll keep them cleaner. They've got larger flanges, and they're also oversized for the BL2 on top of that. So I'm going to have to give the wheels a rating of 2 in this one. For the gear quality of the second generation AHM units, they changed everything completely to plastic in there. All plastic bearings now, all plastic gears, and no more helical cut worm gears. It's all just straight ones that are meshed with a plastic worm. They work quietly enough, at least when they're straight. If the truck moves around at all, then that can cause the gears to go out of proper mesh with the worm, so then that causes occasional grinding noise, can cause binding, other issues like that. I haven't really known these gears to break, so I'm not going to give it a rating of 1, but I don't think I can give this anything better than a rating of 2 for the gear quality. As for the wheels, well, they're basically the same as what you got on the first generation, so nickel wheels at least, but they depend on traction tires to keep the model moving. They're not consistently made, so you're going to get wobble. So once again, they get a rating of 2. And now, DCC and sound for the Bachmann BL2. Of course, this comes with DCC pre-installed, so I'd like to say it gets a 5 on that. However, this is not a very good quality DCC board. It has about the most limited features I've ever seen, including a lack of directional lighting, as I showed before. So if you want to have more realistic operation with this model, you're probably going to want to change out that decoder. And in that case, you're going to have to peel away some of this like hot glue RTV stuff. You're going to have to desolder all the wires to solder in a new decoder. So if you're changing out the decoder, well, which you may want to do, I think because of all the complication there, I'm going to have to give it a 3 for that. Now, as for sound installation, there is, of course, the place for a speaker in the fuel tank, so it's easy to install that in there. All you have to do is run a couple wires up through the chassis, which requires taking out the motor, but as I showed, it's not really too hard to get that up so that you can feed a couple wires through, bring them up here. So I'll give sound installation a 4. For DCC installation of the Proto 2000 BL2, these first generation ones were made before DCC existed, so you're going to have to hardwire everything. Because of some choices they made in there, you're going to have to replace like these braids with actual wires. And the light bulbs, they're 1.5 volt. You'll either have to install resistors or replace them with 12 to 14 bulbs if your decoder doesn't support 1.5 volt lighting. So because of those complications, I'm going to give it a rating of 2, but you at least don't have to isolate the motor from the chassis, so that's a plus. Now I'll mention for the second generation ones, they have an 8-pin plug, but you still have to replace the light bulbs with 12 or 14 volt ones or add resistors, because for whatever reason they made this directional lighting board that's plugged into the 8-pin socket, and you just throw that out when you add your decoder in. That's kind of backwards from how DCC plugs usually are, so since that one still has so much work involved, it would likely also get a rating of 2, but I'm only rating the first generation one here. Now, as for sound installation, well, of course, it's not designed to hold a speaker, but you've got plenty of room to work inside. You see all this open space around here, so you can put a speaker just about anywhere you want. So it's going to be really easy to put a speaker into one of these. So I'll give it a rating of, well, since it doesn't have a spot for a speaker, I'm not going to give it a rating of 5, but I'll still give it a 4. Now for DCC installation in the AHM BL2, of course, it's not DCC ready with it being such an old model, but the motor is isolated from the chassis and so is the light bulb. So that actually means it's going to be pretty easy to hardwire one in there. All you do is connect the track wires to the decoder, attach maybe some new wires over to the light bulb and to the motor, and yeah, just a little bit of soldering there. You can even undo these clips on the motor and the light bulb so that you don't melt any plastic. So and honestly, it's one of the easier hardwiring jobs, so I'll give it a rating of 3. As for sound installation, you get about as much room as possible that you could ever want in here. There's just no specific place to put a speaker, so I'll give it a 4. For the electrical pickup on the Bachmann model, you get wipers contacting all 8 of the wheels around here. And then, of course, the wires come up. It's wired straight to the decoder to go to the motor. So that's going to be about as trouble-free of an electrical system as possible, since wipers also tend to be self-cleaning and you've got nickel-silver wheels, so that gets a 5. For the electrical system in the Proto 2000 BL2, you get electrical pickup from all 8 wheels. It goes through the plates here and the sides of the truck, and of course that is grounded to the chassis with the wire going up there, as well as these plates with the braid going along there. So it's going to be an extremely reliable electrical pickup system. The blackening of the chassis helps to prevent corrosion, so that will get a 5 from me. For the electrical pickup on this first generation AHM model, you get 2 wheels on the rear truck that use their metal axles to make contact through the frame of it, and that wires up to the motor. And then you get the 2 wheels in the front truck, which have a wiper contacting the axles, and then again, wire going to the motor. So only 4-wheel pickup. It's definitely not the best system out there, but not the worst I've seen either. So I'll give it a rating of 2. For electrical pickup in the second generation AHM, it's all been moved to the front truck. And instead of having a wiper contacting metal axles, which keeps it working pretty freely, now you have wipers touching each individual wheel. In the Bachmann one, of course, that was fine because the wheels were geared and the wiper material was thin enough to not put much pressure on them. But these, even though I've adjusted them down to put as little pressure as possible while still also making contact, they're thick enough that they put a lot of drag on these wheels, so there's a potential for them just kind of sliding along the track instead of actually rolling, and that can cause bad wear to the wheels, of course, where if they start dragging all the time, you'll get flat spots on there eventually. So I think I'm going to give this electrical pickup system a rating of 1, because this is about as bad as it gets in an HO diesel. And now for an overall quality rating of the Bachmann chassis. Of course, it's a nice solid brick of metal here, holding everything in place. So that's going to be heavy and durable thanks to that. The gearing wheels, I see those being long-lasting parts with good reliability, as well as the motor. I think that's going to be a very trouble-free part, aside from maybe just having to do a little oiling now and then. So it's not exactly a perfect quality chassis, but I think it is going to be a very good and dependable unit. So I'll give the overall chassis quality a rating of 4. And now for an overall quality score of the Proto 2000 chassis. It is a nice single-piece metal frame here, very durable. And of course you get a high-quality motor, flywheels, and a very durable driveline and heavy-duty gearing. The only issue being the high potential for split gears on the axles, which of course those are replaceable. So the overall chassis quality, I'll give it a 4. So for the overall chassis quality of the first generation AHM BL2, I was honestly thinking of giving it a 3, but I'm going to give it a 2 just because of its consistency issues with the quality of the wheels, as well as the design issues of the motor. If those had been better, I would have given it a 3, but it only gets a 2. And now I also want to look at the durability of each model, with the durability being how easily you can handle these without worry of breaking something. Starting with the Bachmann, of course. The shell, it is made of plastic, so it's not going to be as durable as a metal model, but that's still a pretty good solid piece there. Not much flexibility to it. You've got your metal grab irons, no risk there to speak of. Handrails, nice and flexible. They're going to be durable, even though they're very thin and fine scale. Sunshades, horns, other separate details. There's really not much on here that you can damage. Probably the most vulnerable part would be the cot levers here, which are kind of an extended out piece of plastic, but again, those are flexible plastic, so I'll give this one a durability rating of 4. And now for the Proto 2000 BL2. The shell on this one is really about the same as the Bachmann one for durability. Not much flex there. And plenty of space around it to grab so that you can avoid breaking any details. But for areas that do have a lot of details, like the front and back, those are of course all plastic. They're very fragile. You want to avoid touching them as much as possible. So since this one does have a lot of fragile detail, but there is also plenty of space to grab it to avoid actually touching any of those parts, I can give this one a durability rating of 3. Now for the AHM BL2, there's really not much on there that you can break. The shell is a nice thick piece of plastic, so that's going to hold up pretty well to extensive handling. Horns, I haven't really seen many problems with those breaking on other used examples I've seen. I think about the thing you would have to watch out for most is the handrails. These could potentially break off or get lost, but still pretty durable overall, so I can give it a rating of 4. The couplers on the Bachmann BL2 are their Easy Mate Mark IIs, which of course are just their standard plastic knuckle couplers with metal coil springs. So these, they may not be the most realistic, and definitely not the highest quality, but they are at least dependable. I've never had any problems before with them, so I'll give that a 3. And as for the coupler height, you can see right there with the standards gauge that the pin sits high enough that it won't cause any problems, but the coupler itself hangs just a little bit low. It's definitely at a tolerable level. It shouldn't cause any problems on the layout, but since it's not at a perfect height, I'll give it a rating of 4. The Proto 2000 BL2 includes horn hook couplers instead of knuckle couplers, and I'd say these are at least at the high end of horn hooks. They have nice springiness to them, they move easily, and they're pretty dependable as far as these kinds of couplers go, so I can give them a rating of 2. And as for the height, I mean, I can't really couple it to the standards gauge, but you can see here that it is sitting at the correct height. And that should also translate well to installing knuckle couplers, so I'll give that a rating of 5. On the AHM BL2, you get a horn hook coupler with the Rivarossi style centering spring and long shank, and that makes it a little overly complicated while at the same time being an underperforming coupler. It doesn't spring back to position very well. Because it's truck mounted, it's going to momentarily change height as it goes over a bump or going into a steep grade, so you're not going to have the most reliable height either. Also, I see these breaking quite a bit on different models, so they're not the most durable couplers either. So coupler quality gets a 1, and even though it almost matches to the height gauge, like I mentioned before, that's going to be changing height as it runs along the track, and that can potentially lead to decoupling, so coupler height gets a rating of 2. And now looking at wheel gauging, the Bachmann BL2 has all of the wheels perfectly in gauge. I didn't find anything at all off about them, so that gets an easy rating of 5. For the Proto 2000 model, of course the wheels aren't going to be staying in gauge well once the axles split, but before the axle split on these, I've never had any problems with them before. They've always been very dependably gauged for me, so this also gets a rating of 5, assuming that they are consistently putting those together properly at the factory, which I think they were. For the AHM model, gauging is mostly good across the different axles. I just noticed maybe one of these geared axles is slightly narrow, but the rest of them, they're all right where they need to be, so I'll give gauging on this one a 4. For the second generation AHM model, the powered axles, geared axles, are consistently correctly gauged, so no problems there. But the unpowered axles are consistently narrow in gauge by a small amount. And since these are heat set onto plastic axles, they can't be adjusted. So I'll give this a rating of 3 for its overall gauging. Now for rating the weight of the models, I've been trying to figure out a fair and consistent way to do that. And what I've figured out here to use going forward is to round to the nearest 10 scale feet. So a model that is like 15 to 24 scale feet long would be the 20 scale foot class. And that would be a 1 point for every 2 ounces of weight. And the BL2s are 54 scale feet long, so that will be 1 point for every 5 ounces. So a weight of 1 to 5 ounces would be 1 point. 6 to 10 ounces would be 2, 11 to 15 would be 3, 16 to 20 would be 4, and above 20 would be 5. And now that we've got that figured out, checking the Bachmann BL2 first, weighs 13.6 ounces, giving it a rating of 3. The Proto 2000 BL2 has a weight of 13.2 ounces, also giving it a rating of 3. And the AHM BL2 weighs 14.4 ounces, also giving it a rating of 3. So for the features, the Bachmann BL2 narrowly wins with a score of 63. The Proto 2000 BL2 got a score of 61. If it had better quality axle gears and came with knuckle couplers out of the box, it would have beaten the Bachmann model. And then the AHM model for the first generation gets a score of 41, second generation a score of 38. And now moving on to the performance section of this comparison. I've made sure that each model is run in, that all the wheels are clean, and that they're warmed up before they're on camera to make sure that everything is as consistent as possible and as fair as possible. So starting out with the Bachmann BL2, we'll check the speed at 12 volts. Making sure that's going forward. So I'm rating the maximum speed on a plus or minus 10 mile per hour scale. The prototype BL2 is rated to run at 65 miles per hour, and the Bachmann model here hits 55 miles per hour. So that gives it a rating of 4 for its maximum speed at 12 volts. Now looking at the 12 volt speed on the Proto 2000 BL2. Get that started up. Goes nice and smooth. And with everything warmed up and up to speed, 12 volts, that hits 66 scale miles per hour, which is almost perfectly spot on to that 65 mile per hour prototype speed. So this one scores a 5. And now the AHM first generation BL2. You probably already have an idea of what's coming. So 12 volts, it hits a speed of 115 scale miles per hour, giving it a score of 1. And the second generation AHM with the C learner here just for a demonstration. Runs even faster than the first generation model, hitting 135 scale miles per hour when warmed up, giving it a rating of 1. And now next we'll look at the low speed control of each model, and I'm rating this based on multiples of 3. So if it's 1 to 3 scale miles per hour, that's a score of 5. If it's above 12, then that's a score of 1. So starting with the Bachmann model here, I've got this on DC right now. It's a dual mode DCC decoder, of course. And The decoder definitely shows its operating weakness in this area where the model kind of starts and then it stops and then it surges forward, slows down, kind of stops, and then surges forward again. The minimum steady speed I can sustain with this is 13 scale miles per hour, which gives it a score of 1. However, on DCC, which I'll show you now, you can see that it has a little bit of a stepping motion, but it's steady at about 1 scale mile per hour. So on DCC, it gets a score of 5. So I'll average that out to a score of 3. Low speed control for the Proto 2000 BL2. It's not perfectly steady, but it is able to maintain a slow speed of about 3 scale miles per hour. And that gives this one a score of 5. And now for the AHM BL2 first generation. Takes a little voltage to get going, but the sustained low speed of this one is surprisingly good. I just have to get to a steady voltage there. And that's maintaining a scale speed of about 6 miles per hour. So that gives it a rating of 4. And now for the second generation AHM chassis. Takes more voltage to get it going. Once you do finally manage to find a low speed that it can sustain, just have to work with it a little bit, and then I can get a low speed of about 7 to 8 scale miles per hour. So that gives it a rating of 3, but it doesn't maintain it very well. I also want to rate the low speed stability of all these models, and you can keep in mind that I'm using smooth filter DC, not pulse power or anything like that, because that would be cheating. So the Bachmann model, thanks to being so steady on its DCC low speed control, as well as the fact that it was very smooth once I found that sustainable speed on DC, it gets a score of 5. The only issue came from the DCC decoder on DC mode. So if you were to change that out or do something with that, it would fix things on DC quite a bit. Anyway, for the Proto 2000 model, since that one is a very steady low speed, not quite perfect, but still very steady, it gets a 4. And for the AHM first generation model, I'll give that one a score of 3 because it honestly did a pretty good job of sustaining its low speed. It just takes a little bit of work to keep it going, but not too much. Second generation, though, only gets a rating of 2 because that 3-pole motor just doesn't hold up very well. Now for testing the efficiency of the models, the same as the F7 comparison I did before. I'll be scoring this based on free running current draw will be starting at 0.15 amps and in increments of 0.1 after that. So if it's 0.15 or less, then it gets a score of 5. If it's above 0.55, then it's a score of 1. And for stall current, I'll start at 0.8 and go up in increments of 0.4. And of course, starting with the Bachmann 1, get that going. At 12 volts, that has an average current draw of about 0.1 amps running free for a score of 5. And as for stall current, it only comes up to 0.6 amps, which also gives it a score of 5. So this is definitely the most efficient model of the group. The Proto 2000 model starts at about 1/4 of an amp, but that quickly drops down to an average of 0.2 once it's warmed up, so that gives it a score of 4 for free running. And stalled, it hits 1 amp, which just barely keeps it within a score of 4. Running free, the AHM model averages about 0.55 amps for a score of 1, and the stall current exceeds 3 amps, also for a score of 1. And the current draw of the second generation model is exactly the same as the first generation, so that is 1s all around. The next test for each model is the pulling power, and I found that with my freight cars, my best rollers, it takes 0.8 ounces of force to pull 10 of them along. And I am scoring this in multiples of 10 freight cars, so above 40 it gets a 5. And starting with the Bachmann BL2, it has a pulling force of 3.2 ounces for 40 freight cars, giving it a score of 4, just barely missing a score of 5. The Proto 2000 model has a pulling force of 3.3 ounces for 41 freight cars, which just barely gives it a score of 5. And then the AHM model, thanks to its traction tires, has a pulling force of 5.7 ounces for 71 freight cars, which gives it a score of 5, even though it's kind of cheating. Now the next test for each model is the smoothness, which is, of course, just how smoothly it runs, making sure it doesn't have any sort of surging motion or wobble or anything like that. And the Bachmann BL2, it is a very smooth runner. Thanks to its smooth gearing, it doesn't have any sort of surging motion, which is something that can be caused by poor quality gears or other mechanical issues. Now, it's not quite a perfectly smooth wobble-free model though, just because of having one or two wheels that are slightly off, so you can see a little bit of wobble there. So I'll give it an overall rating of 4 for its smoothness. And now the Proto 2000 starts up nice and smooth. It's very steady. No surging motion of any kind. No wobble either that I can see. And even when I stop it by the coupler. And that is just about as smooth as model can get, so this one gets a 5. And now the AHM. These first generation ones, there's not really a lot of surging motion to them just because the gearing is pretty good quality. But there is a lot of wobble. So yeah, you can see that's really wobbling a lot there. This isn't the worst I've ever seen, but it's still pretty bad, so I'm going to give this a rating of 2. Second generation AHM chassis. It's about the same as the first for smoothness. A lot of wobble, thanks to not exactly the best quality wheels. A little bit of surging motion too. So yeah, it gets a rating of 2. And now for rating the noise. Here's a model that I would give a 5 due to its extreme quietness and lack of motor and mechanical noise. And here's a model that gets a 1 due to its excessive motor and gear noise. For the Bachmann model, rolls along quietly, has minimal gear noise. The motor is audible though, and I hear just a little bit of additional noise from, just a little bit of chattering noise from the bearings and drive line, so it's a pretty quiet model overall. We'll give it a rating of 4. Proto 2000. Has a little more of a growl to it than the Bachmann one, but you don't hear the motor or driveline quite as much. So this one also gets a 4. First generation AHM. It's not a quiet model. It's sort of tolerable at reasonable speeds, but there is a lot of noise throughout from all different things combined. And when you get to full speed, it really makes it loud. So I'm going to have to give this one a rating of 2 for its noise. Second generation AHM. They managed to make the drive system a little bit quieter, but the motor is actually louder than the 5-pole. So this one also gets a rating of 2 for noise. And now for the tracking ability of each model, which is its ability to stay on track through bumpy areas and switches. For the Bachmann one here, I'll run it through my whole cross switch. Stays nice and smooth. It makes it through no problem at all. So it gets a score of 5. And now the Proto 2000. Perfectly smooth all the way through. This one also gets a score of 5. And now AHM. Makes it through pretty well overall. I have noticed a few times though that it can actually catch on a switch a little bit. So I can't give this a perfect rating of 5. And also the larger flanges could give it some problems with the finer codes of track, especially code 70. You can't use it with that. Might make it through code 83. So I'll give it a tracking ability rating of 3. And now the last test is for electrical reliability. So I have the powered frogs here switched off so that they're not helping out with the model at all. Bachmann BL2 all-wheel electrical pickup. Just run that through slowly. And not even a flicker. So this one gets a 5. Proto 2000. And once again, not even a flicker thanks to its 8-wheel electrical pickup, so it also gets a 5. Now the AHM first generation BL2, only 4-wheel electrical pickup, 2 wheels from the front truck, 2 wheels from the back. Stalled there, and there. And it almost stalled a 3rd time. So I can only give this one a reliability score of 2 for its electrical pickup. Now 2nd generation AHM, which has all 4 wheels in one truck picking up and none of the wheels in the other truck. One time stalling. Again. Almost didn't make it through there. So this also gets a reliability score of 2 for its electrical pickup. So for the final score on performance, the Proto 2000 comes in first with a score of 46, but the Bachmann is close behind with a score of 44, and then definitely not close is the first generation AHM with a score of 24, and 2nd generation with a score of 22. And now for the final scores, the Bachmann BL2 comes in first with a total score of 171, although the Proto 2000 is very close behind with a score of 169. Then the first generation AHM BL2 has a score of 94, and the 2nd generation a score of 89. So about those final detail scores, the Bachmann BL2 did just barely edge out the Proto 2000 BL2. However, the Proto 2000 is the more detailed of the 2 models thanks to its numerous separate grab irons, the see-through vents with fans, those sliding sunshades, and other things where they just went the extra mile to make it a really impressive model for its day. The Bachmann one simply has better quality of detail in a few key areas, which is why it ended up with a higher score. And if Bachmann had only separated the grab irons, made those separately applied parts all around, and then done a couple other things with like some of the steps, maybe the vents, it would have been a clear winner. But for some reason, they decided to either leave off some parts entirely or mold grab irons in other places on where they shouldn't have. And when it comes to the features of the models, the Bachmann BL2 did, again, just barely edge out the Proto 2000 model for its overall score, but it has some things working against it, like the lighting system. It should have had the correct color of headlight and tail light. They obviously did that for the number boards. They could have done that for the main lights. and they should have made them directional instead of putting in a really, really cheap decoder with fewer functions than you would have found in the earliest decoders in the 90s. They just made some poor decisions there, and if they had only put in a tiny bit more effort, it would have been a clear winner in this area. And for the performance, the Proto 2000 model just barely came in first place. If only Bachmann had used a better quality decoder or simply made their model DCC ready, it would have been on par with the Proto 2000 because it is a very smooth and efficient runner. They made a good chassis, they just cheaped out in a couple key areas where they shouldn't have. And now the last thing I'm rating for each model is their value, which is the total score divided by the average selling price. And the AHM model pretty easily comes in first here with an average price of $25 for both first and second generation. You get a value score of 3.76 and 3.56. However, since you're not actually spending very much, even though you're getting the most for your dollar, you're still not actually getting much. So next in line is the Proto 2000 with an average selling price that I've seen of about $60 online, giving it a value of 2.82. And then coming in last is the Bachmann model with an average selling price of $200, which gives it a value of only 0.86. And for a few more things to consider about these models, the Proto 2001 will likely have split gears right up front that you'll want to change out. It only costs a few dollars to get replacement gears for it that'll last for a really long time. They're easy to change out, so I would just plan on that if you're wanting to get the Proto 2000. And with the Bachmann model, since it has what may be one of the worst decoders in the history of HO scale built directly into it, you may want to go ahead and spend the $20-25 up front to get a decent decoder to change out that original one so that you can at least get directional lighting and a couple other functions out of it and quieter motor control. Also, you may want to change out the lights with better colored LEDs or even incandescent bulbs just to get a better appearance there. And if you're running purely on DC, you might just want to rip the decoder out altogether and hardwire it for pure DC operation. And one more thing, these have a full retail price of $290. They're not worth it. Don't ever pay that much for one of these because it is an absolute ripoff. Even $200 is kind of much for what you're getting, but it's a lot better than $290. And that is it for my detailed review and comparison of HO scale BL2s. So thank you for watching. I know this was a long video, but I hope you were able to make it all the way through and learn a little more about all the different details and features of these different models.